Listen, okay, thank you for being here this morning. I'm going to quickly start with introductions. Let's start with you, Sonia. Just a quick, who you are, what do you do for a living?
My favorite question,
Yes.
Lofnet. Sonia Blighnout. I am a practitioner of complexity, let me put it that way. So probably the shortest way to say what I do is I help people become more comfortable in uncertainty and continuously changing contexts.
You've been doing this for years and it wasn't really that applicable until now.
Yeah, I like to say I've been working with complexity before it became cool.
Yes.
So I've been doing it for about 25 years, yeah.
But what was interesting is your background. You studied meteorology, no?
Meteorology, yes.
Why did you decide on that?
Long story, but to please my dad, who told me I needed to become a scientist. You know, it's quite a common story, I think. And I've always loved extreme weather. I had this very naive perspective that meteorologists are like the storm chasers in the US. And then when the reality hit me that all I'll be doing is like simulating those weather systems on a computer, it was like, this isn't for me.
Very interesting. But I think that base knowledge is very interesting. Stephen?
Yeah, so currently I'm an account manager with Salesforce. Prior to that, I was working as a solutions architect, but found myself just being involved in projects overseas. I like being part of this economy. I moved from the UK to South Africa 15 years ago now, where I was working for SAP. And yeah, I think that this is a very exciting place to be. It's a very exciting place to do business. So following the account management side, prior to that, I built up a practice, a CX practice at Lighthouse, now part of NTT. But yeah, my fascination is that interface between people, process, and technology. I'm no solid believer that one thing does the change. It's the balance of those three things that cause the change. And that's, why I'm here.
Let me remind people who's listening that it was actually your conversation around the Indian curry.
A lot of good things started around a curry, Lochner, and this is where we are.
That sparked the idea for a podcast. Karin, just again yourself for the guests.
My name's Karin. I'm a psychologist, and I'm learning a lot on this podcast, enjoying it. It's really interesting to hear, and I'm looking forward to what you have to share today.
Thank you. So listen, what's interesting I thought about this morning was our first podcast. I remember the tone was, it's such an exciting time because the bond markets are growing, the rand dollar is strengthening, the gold price is just going to the roof, and it's the time now to be assertive and invest and whatever the case might be. Now I think it's 2 months later, and now all of a sudden it's like, and I think it's a good. That quote you had to. Who's Michael Mead, by the way? Anyway,
he's a mythologist. Very interesting. Yeah, he works with myths and.
But he said, you quoted it on one of your stuff that I listened to. I can't remember. To be alive in this time is to be in the liminal phase of a collective rite of passage. It's deep. It's really deep. Which is cool for me because I never had the opportunity to go to the army. And my parents always said, if you didn't go to the army, you never went through the rite of passage to be a man. But it feels like we are in a bit of a rite of passage, and the people who can navigate this wisely and intelligently or have some form of a rite of passage. Can you please just define liminal before we start? Or everybody can pause and just Google it. But what does liminal mean? Liminal space?
So the best way to describe it, I think, is with an analogy or with a metaphor. But it essentially means you're in a threshold space. So it's like the cocoon. It's this in-between space where what used to be is no longer accessible, but what will be hasn't happened yet. So it's this in-between misty space that people find very uncomfortable. So that's a brief.
And do you, in your meetings, and I've got you here because you do a lot of, call it vendor-like meetings with customers, do you sense that reality, that liminal space in the decision-making process?
Yeah, I think that there's less of the phenomenon of I'm doing something. There's more the tension, that noumenal tension of saying I need to do something, but how and where and why is the challenge. And in a relatively short space of time, it's gone from how can I replace systems with a technology like AI to how can I get the best out of AI to help me make decisions. And that's been a very positive shift in a relatively short space of time. But the counterpoint is there's so many technologies out there that there's almost a parallax that happens. So I think that's the bit that I'm helping customers try and navigate is, yes, there is a lot of technology. And obviously I'm coming from a vendor angle to say, well, we represent one angle. But what is your thinking around the fabric of your business? And what is the opportunity to replace and enhance? And try and keep it in the process space and move it out of the technology space as much. I mean, ultimately, yes, I have to go behind a technology, but let's frame the conversation a little bit better around the fabric of your organization and the fabric this technology is set to enhance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Karine, I'm just thinking on what he's saying. We spoke about it, the last episode was type of personalities who's now successful versus those old titans. I'm just wondering, these conversations in this liminal space, what type of person is good for this time? You know, what space does a person need to be in? What childhood trauma should they not have?
Look,
You know, is it people with ADHD or without? Is it?
good question. The thing that's been going through my mind as you're speaking is almost like I've heard a lot of talk recently where people say, we introduced computers in school and everybody went, yeah, computers. And then the new research now says, okay, shucks, we might be producing a generation that's like less smart and they think it's because of computers. And so my generation parent right now is thinking, great. So we remove computers altogether and we go back to what we knew, right? Which is what you're saying. If you're in this space, you either yearn for what was or you get really excited about what's coming. And I think that's where the personality difference comes in. I think there are personalities, if we think about some Myers-Briggs types, you know, that enjoy systems that work, tradition, predictability, and they are energized, visionary personalities that love change and want to go with it. So there will be quite a divide. But the question wouldn't necessarily be, are we now catering for the one or the other? But maybe what can we do to accommodate the shadow side of both? You know, because often visionary excitement also comes with impulsivity. And ADHD, right? And
executive function.
And on the other side, for those who find security in predictability and things that work, and I guess you could add the trauma side there, change becomes quite a scary thing.
Yeah.
Now, what is this going to do to my nervous system?
Because it's interesting, I mentioned it earlier, I think it was Robin. Fisher said it, probably, I can't remember, 5-6 years ago, where he said, our biggest competitor is not another big software vendor, it's indecision.
Yep.
It's not making a decision. And it sounds like, I don't know if you can maybe expand a little bit on that. When people are in this liminal space, facing this complexity, because there is complexity in being in that space, can you give any advice to our listeners? Like, listen, what do we need to do? And I think I like that forest story of yours. I kind of, I don't know if you can bring that forest in, but it's up to you.
I think the thing is, what happens is we've been socialized in certain ways. So, for example, if you're in a senior leadership role, you need to be decisive and you need to get things right and you need to have answers. I think that is, so there's this pressure that you need to know. So we've almost made knowing and being competent the same thing. And now what's happened is the environment has shifted. It's not like you've become incompetent over time or just overnight. The external context has shifted. So especially the people that you mentioned, Karine, that's comfortable with, certainty, with predictability and stability, that's dissolving. And so there are still areas where you can have it, but overall there's fewer and fewer. And so I think the one thing is almost to understand that it's not necessarily you, it's the environment. And if you can let go of this thing of I have to know. Because there are things, and this is one of the things in complexity, is you're dealing with unknown unknowns. And nobody knows. So it's not a judgment on you. Nobody can know. And so when you kind of step into that, then it becomes, okay, how do we find our way together? And this is, I think, where maybe the forest metaphor comes in, because, and maybe I'll take a step back from the forest. One of my blog posts that got quite a bit of traction, the headline was, "It's hard to survive in the jungle if you were trained in a zoo." And I think that's still quite a apt analogy, because it's almost like the zoo cages have opened and we can see the wild, but we don't feel safe. But now, in the past, we had the option to stay in the zoo. Now we can't. And so what do we do when we're in a forest or in the wild where there are no paths? We need to make them. And for some, this is exciting, and for others, it is very scary. But I think just coming into the present moment and saying, I don't know, but let's find out together.
Yeah.
And then make the path by walking. I think that's the invitation.
I think the one thing I'm observing in the field is when that pressure comes down, there's a certain personality type that wants to err towards that certainty. And their tension is, I can't provide everything that was certain with a new technology. The other side is, well, this is just so exciting. This is everything we can do. It's running into the jungle. And where I see the midpoint being is you've got a technology which is really good at generating or assessing content and coming up with a guide. How can these technologies be companion technologies rather than outcome technologies? And I think that is a good framework to move forward with this process. And I go back to one of the best clients I've ever worked with, where we were going through a project and we found that we were just spending too much time on fringe cases to build something that was unbreakable, that would deal with a really bad case study. And the customer was a retailer. And we kept on going back to, what if a kid walks into the store and a lintel falls on their foot and the CEO finds out via LinkedIn? I'm going, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And we landed up building up all these acceptance criteria in the sort of agile framework. And I'm going, this is pretty fringe. Now, I wasn't directly, but it was my team that was executing the project. So we came back to the playback, and the customer, because like the ultimate, exec, was like, where's this going? And he obviously he knew the personality types that were involved with why this fringe case became so prevalent. And he came around and he turned things around so brilliantly. And he says, all I want is a system where my people can honor a promise. And I thought that was brilliant. And it's something I bring into conversations, whether I'm working with customers at the start of the cycle or where I was before, which was more kind of in the execution framework. Can you honor a promise? Then there's a sort of deeper question with these changes. What are your new promises? Of the 10 rules that you have, what are the 2 you're going to lose and the 2 you're prepared to bring in? And I think that is a nice framework to find yourself in, because it's brilliantly framed. It's that fringe between the zoo and the forest. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's easy to deliver on your promises in the zoo.
Yeah, but you have to deliver on promises in the jungle. And I think the best thing to do is use your technology as a companion rather than a total, here's the standard operating procedures and off you go. It's the reason why I think in the military environment, elite regiments are small, because you train people to make decisions on the fly. And I think sometimes with the new technology, you've got to go small, and you've got to take small sorties into the jungle instead of trying to march a whole army in there.
Yeah, you need to shift to being much more experimental. And I'll build on your analogy there. I think sometimes we want to use these technologies. One of my favorite terms is we outsource our relationship with uncertainty to certainty merchants. And we make these technologies, we want it to be a map or a GPS versus a compass. and I think it's a completely different, and then also, as you say, be more experimental. Don't try and get everything right in the beginning. Just take a step and then learn, reorient, take another one.
And I think I can testify, and you can as well, for anybody who's listening thinking they're way behind. Nobody's really way behind. My experience has been when you speak to medium, bigger size customers, they're behind and they're anxious. And when I say they're behind, it's because yesterday I was on a call with a customer and I asked them to bring up their forecast. And it's a big, almost $1 billion company. And they bring up a spreadsheet. That's not even in the cloud. It's on somebody updates it, and then they send it off to somebody else and they need to update it and playing human router. But they're successful, but they now all of a sudden they've got this urge. And I think something I want to quote you on as well, Sonia. Complexity consciousness is not something we learn, but something we remember. It's a felt sense that we are not outside complexity, but entangled within it. So what I'm sensing is that people want to do something, they don't know exactly what, but it's almost as if it's based in some memory of how things should be or could be. I don't know if I can, if you can run on that a little bit.
One of my frustrations, is it feels like we've made complexity this thing that sits somewhere outside of us, and we've labeled it, things like wicked problems, and, we problematize it. But we've always been in complexity. We're in complexity now. We don't know where this conversation's going. It's emergent. So we are present. We know that things are slightly unknown here. But when children, and you probably will be able to say much more about this, but children are naturally complexity fit. They're curious. They don't need certainty. It's taught out of us. But then also, when you go home to your wife, you don't go with a spreadsheet, and you don't have targets that you set, and you don't expect certainty. So in social contexts, and when we parent, we bring that complexity consciousness, but then we step over the threshold into the workplace, and all of a sudden we expect everything to be very predictable and certain. And so our bodies know how to be in complexity. Our minds get tangled because we want to be certain and we want to know. And if you try and figure the complexity out, that's when you get tangled. So I think if you almost normalize, you've always been in complexity. Your body's complex. I mean, your mind is one of the most complex things. Consciousness itself is complex. So if you can just normalize that, then you can be in that liminality, in that continuous change. But as long as you expect certainty and stability, it's going to not go so well for you.
But Sonia, why do you think we do that? Why do we have an expectation that we have to get out of complexity? Are we scared we're going to fail, or scared we're not going to make enough money, or what? Why did we unlearn that?
I think it's many things, but I think over time we've become addicted to certainty. We like things to be predictable. We like stability. If you think about it, the last few decades, so let's say after the Second World War, we've had this almost like an abnormal time of relative stability, and we've gotten used to it. And now we have all of these predictive technologies as well. So I think it's Esther Perel. I was listening to one of her podcasts. And she said, we are living in this form of assisted living, where Spotify tells you what to listen to, Netflix tells you what to watch. It's like we no longer make decisions ourselves. And so now we're kind of live in this world where we expect everything to be stable and certain. And so we've almost unlearned how to be with uncertainty. And we don't like discomfort.
Sorry, just as you're chatting, it brings something, and the whole idea of home and work. I'm glad you stepped on, because it's so fascinating. My eldest has just started, very bright kid, bumped up a year.
Your genes.
No, definitely not. But the one thing and it's something we share, is had to choose subjects for the last 3 years of school. and was strong in the sciences, but also strong in art. And I said, well, and school's quite small, so you have to do art at a sort of academy off the premises. And I said, I'll do art, because if you're doing science and biology and stuff, it's just a nice antidote. And a couple of weekends ago, just comes with this idea and wants to recreate the Tower of Babel. And next thing is paper mache everywhere. And I'm kind of sitting there, but like, where's your plan? And then I realized, I'm sounding like my dad now. Like, where's your plan? He was a project manager, constantly said, where's the plan? Where's the plan? But I saw this child deal with the complexity and the planning in a very natural way. And I felt myself having to sort of challenge my own thinking. And the background is, it's just not right. You can't do a project this big without doing a smaller one. And then I'm going, hang on, I'm questioning my conversations about scale. This child was not scared of scale. It's building something, big. It's taking over our house. It's just getting bigger and bigger. But that freedom around complexity was actually reassuring. And Al's working backwards towards technique. Whereas we're taught, and I think this is a problem with the workplace, we work forward from getting the basics right to complexity. And we've got to think of the younger people coming into our workforce, they're more familiar with complexity. We've gone through an experience of all our managers over time have said, deliver something that is predictable. And now suddenly delivering a predictable, consistent outcome isn't really what the market wants. So that's weird. That's a different space to be in. Yeah. So I think we should be encouraging complexity and allowing people to sort of have these ideas and work backwards instead of sort of saying, oh, there's this new technology, but if you do all of these things, you get to play with that new
Give us a practical example.
So I think, literally a conversation the other day with a customer, and they're saying, oh, we really want to kind of have these forums when people just come up with ideation around AI. And I'm going, okay, that's great. You inherently going into complexity. But let's ask some really good leading questions so we can try and frame it down. So there's this technology, it's AI. What lever are you trying to pull? So it's not like I'm telling you, you have to fill out a business case. Just what lever are you trying to pull? Oh, yeah, there's a thing. Am I trying to resist churn? Am I trying to grow the market? What is this technology going to do? Then, okay, look at what is the job to be done in its simplest form. Then once you've understood what that job to be done is, to say, I want a bot that predicts, looks at my historical sales records and says, based on where this customer is now and historically where customers were, there's a churn risk. So it's a bit predictive, but there's something else to it. Okay, fine. What about this job? Doesn't need to eat, doesn't need to sleep. It can run 24/7. And then you start airing in towards that compute space. And then you think, oh, there's actually something quite novel about this solution. I think there's, much like my daughter's art project, there's a big idea. But all you can do is come from the sides and say, okay, what is it about the Tower of Babel that interests you? How can I, assist you with that? How can I be a companion to the technology you want to deliver? Whether it's an art project or a bot or an agent, I think you can apply the same rules.
Yeah.
There are some frameworks that you can bring in to just help sort of cement what is it you're trying to achieve.
I'm just wondering if there's actually, I can't remember if I had a conversation around this or I just thought about it. I think it was we did an ROI, we were busy with the ROI calculation for a customer. And one of the stuff you need to input is the average salary for that person in that function that we're trying to automate. And with my partners in the Middle East, you see the variance in salaries is massive, right? So I'm just wondering if it's part of our challenge here is to the economics doesn't make sense at the moment. I'm asking if it does. So a lot of these easily trodden paths in the forest that people are trying to automate is trying to replace work done by people who's costing on average 10 to 15 grand a month. And you've got 20 of them sitting there doing the work, and then you look at the quote of the implementation and the technology to actually implement the AI, and you're thinking, this doesn't make business sense. It's still cheaper to have the humans doing this. For instance, South Africa, labor is cheaper than in other markets. How is that affecting the potential for us to go into and leveraging AI tools in business?
I think getting started, Lochner, is the problem. Like, I think that ROI calc is where we need to start. And I think that a lot of customers are struggling there. And I actually have a degree of empathy, because I think there's pressure from a board level and then from an investor level to say, okay, you've got to do this AI thing. And it is quite, okay, and what? And then that pressure sort of just slides downhill. And then you look at, well, it's going to cost this amount per action, per topic, whatever framework there's still going to be a cost associated to it. And it's shifting from a user-based license quite often to something that's metered. So there's other shifts commercially that are there. So in the wrong hands, it could be a reason to not do something. But I think there's a counterpoint to our South African challenge in that, yes, there are these 10,000, 15,000 Rand salaries. But at the same time, I'm having conversations with customers. Why do I keep on having to bring in international resource to implement X? And I'm going, because we're not getting people out of that 15,000 Rand slot. So I think the question really should be, how many companions can we bring to that person that helps them grow their career to be 25K consultants and move them on? Because previously, when I was in the SAP consulting world, I'd noticed that we were losing people. 5 years qualified, Australia, UK, Netherlands. We've got, I think, if we want to be more self-sufficient in South Africa, with technology, we've got to use technology to accelerate people's growth and not just look at their salary and how we can replace it with a bot, because it doesn't put those people on a continuum. You have to think about where that 10,000, 15,000K resource is going to be in 5 years' time. And I think that's possibly what's missing often in the equation. It's not continue replacing this 10, 15K resource with AI. No, I think that's the wrong framework.
But I like what you're saying, that I really like the word companion, because if you move from, am I replacing staff with a computer or a robot or whatever, versus how can I use tech to give my staff member a companion, then essentially what we're doing is we're removing the anxiety. Because what I'm hearing from you is that the anxiety is, am I going to make a mistake if I move to tech too quickly and then I don't make as much money because it's more expensive than my staff? Or am I going to make a mistake if I don't move to tech and then I'm behind, which brings it back to what you said earlier, And so if the tech is not a replacement but a companion, then you dissolve that issue, which gives you maybe more tolerance for the complexity.
I think something that to refer back to the zoo and the jungle, I feel, and this is a personal frustration, it feels like we are looking at this new technology that, it's one of the most powerful technologies that humans have ever had access to. And we're looking at it through a zoo mind. We're trying to essentially, how do we bring it in our organizations to make us more efficient? So we've got that efficiency lens.
But that predictability lens.
And also, I think the thing that and I'm stating it a little bit stronger than normal, like you need efficiency, yes, but you also need effectiveness. And effectiveness sometimes requires a little bit of inefficiency. You need some messiness, you need redundancy, all of these things that help you become more resilient. But what many organizations, and I have a friend, this is a real example, she's based in Sweden, and her husband, she's joined his business. They make heat pumps, and it's a scale up. They're like growing like the clappers. And she said to me the other day, her biggest frustration is that all of the AI conversations are focused around internal efficiency and replacing people, or it's the HR efficiency angle. And she said, and all the while there's technologies out there, also AI based, that can make their product 70% more effective. And so there's this internal efficiency focus that I don't necessarily feel is necessarily, going back to the forest analogy. sometimes we need to look completely outside of where everybody else is looking to find the real opportunity. But we're bringing this zoo mentality, like how do we cut costs with AI? How do we, make things more efficient? And what I'm also seeing in some organizations is they're taking broken processes that should have been redesigned long ago, and now they're bringing in AI to automate things that actually it's just going to make things worse. So how do we take a step back? I love Heifetz. Ron Heifetz wrote a book, The Practice of Adaptive Leadership, and he spoke about sometimes you need to get off of the dance floor and onto the balcony. And I think sometimes when that pressure comes, executives are so in the weeds, like we just need to make a decision fast. When do you take a step back onto the balcony and look at what else? What are the patterns? Where else is there opportunities that we haven't thought about? That's not only about efficiency.
But as you're chatting, I mean, big data and predictive analytics 5 years ago was the talking point, 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I was dealing with a customer then. I was very much on the fringe of the project, and it was an equipment company, and how can we use predictive analytics to sort of say, well, at what intervals do we need to maintain, this vehicle? If it's at the coast, we need to do X. If it's up in Kumba, we need to do Y. And the proof of concept was brilliant. Where it failed was the customer had to change so many of their inherent processes because they couldn't actually handle what the machine was telling them. And I think that's 100% right. Everyone is on the dance floor, okay? And then suddenly someone changed the track and no one knew how to dance. Yeah. And it was the most amazing thing that, it was a total win. It was a completely successful proof of concept. It wasn't adopted because the ability to actually change processes based on the new insight. Now, if you take the generative phase that we're in right now, we're aggregating content in a way that's never been done before.
Just explain that in layman's terms.
So basically, what AI mines is stuff that we've put out there. It's either historical, sitting at what would have been on your bookshelf as a kid as the encyclopedia. It's also the conversation that happened in the playground. It's also what's happening in the magazine. At no point in human history have we been able to take all three data sources and hammer them together so that when you ask a question, you get an encyclopedia's point of view, the playground's point of view, and the magazine's point of view. And it's all there in front of you. And it says, it's still nuanced enough to say, do you want to look at it from this angle or do you want to look at it from that angle? You're like, geez, of course I want to look at it. And then you go down the wormhole and you have a bit of fun with it. But this is unprecedented.
Yeah.
You're having all of these data points at once. But how can the brain handle that? Because before, if I'm doing research, I go to my encyclopedia. If I'm having a chat, I go to the playground. If I want a little bit of, slightly interesting but not heavyweight, I'd go to my magazine. Now you're thrusting all three of those things to me at once. Hang on. And, but that's possibly the negative side. But to go back to the Swedish example, that's exactly what your friend's saying. You actually need a bit of the playground and the encyclopedia to figure out what processes you can change. And I think that's where the prompt engineering, which is, funny enough, a term that everyone was talking about. Oh, we're going to have armies of prompt engineers. And 18 months ago, everyone was mad about that. Yeah. That conversation seems to have dissipated. But I still think there's a very valid play to say, ask a better question. But once you understand that the aggregation of content is really what's being mined with AI, I think that helps. Because if you point it directly at your historical processes, guess what? You're just in a predictive story again. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question, but that's the way I like to sort of frame it.
Sure. I think to try and keep it as, the risk with these type of conversations, like we said, is it's can keep too much in the abstract. And what we're trying to do here is to give not practical advice, but testimony. There's a question for you, Sonia. If prediction doesn't work in complex systems, because in effect, people are, like you said, trying to use this tech to become more predictive or efficient. If it doesn't work in a complex system, and when we say complex system, it's from the business system, the staff, the product, the software, whatever the case might be, into a bigger community complex system, into the global Iran system. So the question is, what's the skill that replaces forecasting?
So I think maybe there will be, so in any complex system, there are complicated or ordered spaces. So it's not to say that you can predict nothing. So there are some things that's still predictable. I think the problem with forecasting is, again, it's what does the forecasting give you? It gives you a sense of certainty, and it gives you a false sense of certainty.
I mean, like a weather forecast.
Yeah,
There
it's
you go.
That's very good.
luckily I never worked in the forecasting office. But I think it's, you even get it with things like scenario planning. Your scenario plan or your scenarios are always based on past knowledge. It's what you think is possible. So Nassim Taleb with his black swans, it's even those to some extent, you have an idea, of what might. But I think the key thing for me here is pattern intelligence. Like, can you shift your focus from trying to predict what will happen to, can I better monitor for weak signals? Where are things starting to change? Where is change bubbling under? And AI would be really good with, something like this. So it's shifting from what might happen to really being present. What is emerging? Where is there potential that nobody else is seeing? And how can I organize fast enough to be able to benefit from it? Or how do I nip an emerging risk in the bud? But sometimes what we do is, if we're forecasting, it's almost like putting blinkers on. We only monitor for the things we think we know are coming. So I think there's pattern intelligence. It's how do we monitor for weak signals? And that you need some openness for that, because some of these things you might say, well, I don't think, earlier we were talking about sugar and avocados.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like, can you be open to what's emerging? And then one of my favorite words now recently has been discernment. I think we really lack discernment, wisdom. So yeah, and then one last thing is, linking back to what you just said, to be able to get off the dance floor onto the balcony, you need time. And almost the one single thing I hear in all the clients that I work with is, we don't have any time to think. And it's like meeting after meeting after meeting, nobody has time. And that, I think, is really, it's one of the things that's creating so many problems in organizations, that executives and even just people everywhere, they're not taking time to think. They're just on the dance floor.
Yeah.
But sorry, but that brings us back to something you said earlier. You hinted towards the idea of being willing to sit with mess and messiness, right? I think that's the scary thing about taking your time, is then you have to sit in the messiness. Then you can't just quickly fix and clean it up. And that's what people are scared of, right? So I'm thinking about this concept of radical acceptance, where you just accept reality as it is. You don't fight it. And you realize it's not a catastrophe. So it's not a catastrophe if you take your time. It's not a catastrophe if you're a tiny little bit slower than what you think the guy next to you is going.
But I think if you can maybe, I believe you've got a lot of wisdom, Karin, and discernment. That word is very important, because knowing, forecasting, understanding, and discernment is not the same thing. Why don't you expand a little bit on the discernment skill set? Because I think people out there should focus. It's not a. I wish there was a artificial wisdom instead of artificial intelligence, because a lot of this is discernment is wisdom based. It's not something you can quickly find on Claude or ChatGPT.
The thing that comes to mind for me is that I don't think you can be wise or good at discerning if you're not aware of your own blind spots and your own experience and your own fears, right? So I think that's an important thing, is I can't discern if whatever I have to predict or decisions I have to make in my company is good or bad if I don't know what I'm scared of, if I don't know where I typically miss a pattern. So which brings us back to a previous conversation about doing this alone, right? So if you're alone, it's very difficult to discern. I think there's wisdom in the voices of more people. I think there's wisdom in having good self-awareness. And I think there's a lot of wisdom and discernment if you can almost hold the tension of the dialectics. So am I in my emotional mind? Shit, I'm going to have to retrench people. We're going to lose money. I have to keep up, Or am I in my completely like rational mind? Like, this is the theory. This is how the system works. This is what the AI said. I'm just going to stick with that. But if you can combine the two and hold space for both, I think your discernment might be better.
And I'll add to that. Sorry.
No, sure.
So in the collective, I think one of the other things that contribute to this is, can you really value diversity? Like diversity of perspective. You mentioned ADHD and all this. Can you actually, because that's where I think real wisdom comes, is if you can have all of these perspectives and you can value them. But then the other thing is that I think we've lost, and I'll speak for myself. It took me 50 years to realize my body is not only there to carry my head around. I was completely in my mind. A lot of discernment also sits in your intuition. But we've been taught that's fluffy gut feelings. But actually, I think if you can learn also to, like, what am I experiencing in my body now that I need to make this decision, not only in my mind, but that is something that we've unlearned. And I think it's critical that we almost befriend and learn to listen to our intuition again.
Which, by the way, is one of the things that's advisable if you're in a liminal space, is to be more in your body and to be more grounded, because then you tolerate it better.
Well, I think that grounding is, a practical example. So working with a customer, and they're building out some AI proof points, and the view that what does success look like, and it's always a struggle on projects. What is the definition of done? And to this customer's mind, well, the fact that it could produce something repeatably, job done. That's lekker. And I'm going, no, I think we're missing each other, because to that sort of companion idea, how can this technology pick up something that you might have missed, something that's a little bit to the left, that actually is where the biggest opportunity is? And you kind of mentioned earlier the difference between sort of like that effective, the curse of being efficient. When clients come back to you, and think about your day-to-day, when you land up engaging with someone in business or, a store owner, it's when they said, but try this, look a little bit to the left. Here's an idea. You'll do business with that person more often, instead of saying, here's an outcome. We should look at building our technologies in the same way. We should be prepared to be scared at what these technologies throw out, that they come up with something that is, I didn't think about that. Oh, but yeah, I could use that. That's where I think this technology is really rock and roll, and we can get a lot from it. But we've got to give ourselves the time to build out the tech, so that it's not the proof of, this, we can sign this off, move it into production, isn't, it completes 100% of the task in a very predictable manner. I'm saying for some agents and for some builds, that is the case. But if you're building some technology that's going to make you different from your competitor, you've got to be prepared to push it into such a way that it throws things out there that you didn't think about before. Then the real training comes in. How do you get your workforce to deal with this new insight and this new intelligence that's coming through? I think that is the challenge for all of us as practitioners here.
I think a lot of people, Stephen, might be asking, I'm prepared to do that. I'm prepared to, I've got a dynamic team. I can put this tech in and we'll be able to dance with whatever scenarios pops out. But what's the underlying layers that needs to be in place?
Great question.
For that?
So, just flip the switch slightly to when I was actually building out, and I was quite fortunate. I was involved in an internal AI project. And inside the technologies, but it's layman's terms, you got guardrails. So what do you want this agent to do or not do? And even if it's not an agent, it's just some kind of logical process. What guardrails do you want to put in? And whilst you're going through the testing phase, expect hallucinations. If you're not getting hallucinations, you're not pushing your development hard enough. Because those hallucinations, much like that wild guy in the pub, that says something, and you go, geez, that's a bit wild, but that's something to consider. That's what hallucinations are on an AI project. They're like, okay, I wasn't expecting to see that. Double down on that, because that shows how whatever it's looking at from a content point of view, within the logical framework you're applying and building out, something's not acting as it should. That hallucination sort of informs, okay, what do I need to refine? What guardrails do I need to build? And to that earlier point, when I'm getting close to delivering and signing off on what I've built, how human does it seem? That, I think, is those are the steps. And if you find that you get towards the end and it's just seeming quite procedural, I think you need to play with your guardrails a bit more and do a little bit of tuning. Because, that, I think, is the practical side of the build and the technology. The tools are amazing in terms of the fine-tuning you can do and the speed at which you can do it. But the speed at asking questions of it, that's still difficult.
But I want to challenge you. You're still assuming, you're making a few assumptions. Yeah. And you showed your hands there. I don't know what you were mentioning there.
Yeah, they were.
the content that where this AI is getting, what's that and how you build that for a company. For a company that's got some complicated lookup sheets and maybe an ERP that's popping up some reports, how do we get that in place?
Okay, good question. So I think that's the sort of encyclopedia, news magazine, playground type analogy. Your historical trusted information, that has to sort of sit inside your model or be part of one of your models. Then you need to be able to, and we had this challenge. It's like in our own organization, Slack is where a lot of the conversations happen within Salesforce. If you just sort of look at process and don't look at the conversations that are happening, it's a very isolated view. So, okay, well, can we bring that into the model, and can we bring our historical information that sits in our CRM? Okay, so we realize we need to do both. Then in the mechanics, they're saying, here's the question coming, here's the prompt. Let me look to my language model and look at my content. And when I go out, okay, let me validate it against a Claude or against a Gemini. So let me take my internal assumptions and test them in the outside world. Then when it comes back, that's where the validation happens. So it is quite a lot of engineering that needs to happen. I think people kind of skip over that. But inside that structure, when you go out of your world as an organization into the unknown of a larger LLM, into the playground, you're going to get some gossip coming back. How do you want to control that gossip? How do you want to control that feedback? How do you want to learn? And I see a lot of customers skipping that step. And then you're just going to get good at your own stuff. That's missing the point. So, I think you've got to look at, and I think the analogy, I came up with it now, but you've got to look at what's in the magazine, what's in the playground, and what's in the encyclopedia, and you've got to test it with the wider world. You have to have a conversation. So I'd say you have to get those building blocks right in your thinking when you enter this phase. But I'm encouraged. A lot of customers are thinking this way. And what's shifted is that customers are spending the time and using different technologies. They've got a Claude license, and they've got a Gemini license, and they've got ChatGPT, and they're wanting to challenge. If I ask the same question against the different LLMs, what do I come back with? So I think there's good stuff happening, and people are understanding the underlying technology fairly well. But then it comes down to that point that was made earlier in terms of, do I just want predictability, or am I prepared to handle one or two outliers in terms of how I use this in my organization?
So Sonia, questions for you is, what's the hardest conversation you've had with a customer where you had to tell them something they didn't want to hear? I'm going to ask you the same question, more technical.
So I think it was one of the things that I do in the practical things I do is something called narrative inquiry. Because if you really want to understand a culture, for example, in an organization, or how people are making sense of AI, capture the stories, like the water cooler stories. And we did a process like that. I won't name the client, but it's a name that has already been mentioned here. And it came into that organization just after, so the leader had handpicked people from all over the world, and he created his own leadership team. And all of the stories that came out of that organization was around how poor the leadership was. And when the data comes as narrative, as stories from your own organization, you can't blame the consultants. So it's not our survey that wasn't right or the data. It's like, these are the stories people are telling. And that project just died an immediate death, because I think it was, if it wasn't that he had handpicked these people, it would have been different.
Yes.
But he just could not, because it was essentially a judgment on his discernment and the people that he chose. So that was one of the most...
And then you hit the pause button.
Yeah.
And the pause button is quite the sensitive button.
Yeah, which is the thing we're trying to say. It's like, why do we want predictability? So we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry. It's predictable. If I pick a couple of leaders that I know are seemingly good leaders, then it will work, which is what we're trying to guarantee, that it will work.
I think it was Peter Drucker. He said it that, I think he had the story of they wanted to build the best car in the world, so they sent out the engineers to go and find the best engine and the best suspension and the best gearbox, and they found an engine at Rolls-Royce and a gearbox there, whatever, and they brought it all together. In theory, all the best parts in the world to make the best car, but none of those parts fit. So there's no system. Can't make a car because those parts need to fit. And I think that's what I hear is, when you bring these parts and you don't consider how they'll fit to become an engine, it's difficult to face that reality.
And in a human system, it's like at the best of times, human systems don't work like that. You just, you could potentially still have cobbled together a working car. It may not have been the best in the world, but you could have, because it's a machine.
Yeah.
But we've got this machine metaphor in the back of our minds when we think about organizations. And it simply doesn't work. They're human, and they're not always rational. You spoke about the rational.
Our lives and
so it's
background.
But also, I think this, one of the going back to the way at the beginning with this being in the liminal phase of a rite of passage. A rite of passage is very much around, and I think it's quite a hopeful framing, becoming more mature.
When you mentioned the rite of passage, it was, Lochner, you said something, and being of a similar age.
Sorry, what?
Similar, not the same. Lochner, I'm going to take a couple of years on you. This whole thing about a formal versus an informal rite of passage, I think, is such a uniquely South African story in terms of where we've come in such a short space of time. So I didn't go to the army, you didn't go to the army. And for a lot of us, there was tension in the kind of family structure that, this will sort you out, this will sort out the men from the boys. And it's a passing kind of framework inside a society. It was a norm. But quite often we don't get to choose the rite of passage. And I actually think that lends to more fascinating age. So I was at high school in Johannesburg, and it was 1991. Things were proper, and it was touch and go. So the school, just started the school, you've got, the old hostels that were sort of Selby and City Deep and that kind of thing. And the next thing, 2 rattles arrived at the front of the school and the back of the school. I was at boarding school. And we thought, okay, this is a bit of excitement on a Wednesday night. This is not the normal kind of script. And the next thing, out of nowhere, you had a whole lot of guys from the hostels that were all in Carter Freedom Party marching from the bottom of the school to the top of the school. And, I mean, you're in awe, you're scared. It's still, to this day, it's a crazy thing. And then 1 or 2 of the guys that you saw in that group were working at the school, and 2 days later, it was quite arresting. Yeah. But sometimes you need an event like that. You don't need to have that formal structure, that in itself was a rite of passage. Everyone that was there at that time and experienced it realized that the past is the past, the future we don't know, but you're in it. And I just feel like as South Africans, I think we need to give ourselves, and as I said, that's why I want to do business here, because I think we've got to give ourselves the grace to know that we are very resilient. We've gone through this before and we'll go through it again, but we're quite good at transitioning. Yeah. And I've worked overseas for several years. And I think we just got to say, give ourselves the grace and just embrace that change. We're good at it. I think that inherent robustness that we have as a people is going to serve us well. But we need to, as I think inside a leadership space, realize the transitory nature of how we embed technologies in organizations for change.
So if I hear you right, what I think you're saying is that fun line where if everything goes bad on your trip, you just say, this is Africa.
But it's,
you wing it.
it is what it is. You know, the resistance allows you to do the stomach in, chest out. You can put your shoulders back, brace yourself, and move forward. Like I think it's something we do as a people. Now, the ability to kind of do that is a cultural thing. And the interesting thing is, it's actually across all our cultures. It's not just one culture. It's across all our cultures. And when it happens, take the time. And I love what you said. Take the time to pause. I don't think a lot of our execs are being given the time to pause. You know, we were just arguing around the school on a Wednesday night. We were already in a kind of relaxed state. So it was a very fortunate thing about that story. But it just happened. Just allow it to happen. And take on all the sensations. Don't try and mask this is happening. It's happening. And then go. I think we're very good at it.
It's a difficult conversation you had recently with a customer.
I think the most difficult bit is you know, it's technology, it's building blocks. And halfway through a project, customer says, oh, but I really like that feature and functionality. And I was like, no. And they said, no, but the board has said. And I was like, no. And it was a great point. It was a Ukrainian and a South African, so two people that not really great at backing down. But then we just found the meeting of minds to say it was an education program. Unless we take one cohort through the entire process, we can't build out solutions for alumni. You don't have alumni. And just breaking it down to say it's a bit like that US Army, US Navy and Lighthouse kind of scenario. I agree that there's a point that we need to address that part of the business. We're just not at that point. It had to get a bit hairy, but you know, I had to be the lighthouse there. So no, we've got to get the foundations right. We've got to deliver this phase of the project.
Are you saying that because of all of the possibilities that's opening up, it's difficult for companies to really pick what they want to do, and that we can do this, we can do this.
Shiny objects in them.
Slightly shiny objects, but in the education environment, and that's the joy of the work I do. I'm exposed to different industries all the time. Alumni is where the revenue's at. So suddenly, halfway through the project, execs wake up to the fact, well, I'm spending all this money on a system, and right now the revenue is just the fees. In order to keep this institution going, I've got to tap into the alumni. And so let me show, and that's where the shiny bell comes in. Let me show some shiny bell at the end of this project to say, I'm recognizing that we can do something about that. But that would shift the focus. And I just wasn't going to allow that. But it was taking the time to say, you're just 4 years away from what you want to do. Get this cohort through, get them to graduate, and then we can start.
So we're not putting a silver lining so it doesn't look like you've spent a lot of money. We acknowledge the mess.
We acknowledge that the whole reason you're implementing this system is to guide your undergraduates to an outcome. And if that's a positive outcome, you have a happy alum. So stay focused on that. And there's great stuff in this technology around handling the admissions. And I mean, it really is great tech, the solution that Salesforce has. And I think it deals with diversity. It's how can we sort of take you as the student, not just the outcome of the degree, and navigate you through. And we were really focused on the admissions process in terms of, like, it was great for me as a project, because it was for arts and communications and media, that faculty. And the speed at which kids were just putting their portfolios on YouTube and stuff like that. But we focused on saying, is this the right course for you? Setting up questionnaires, setting up processes around that. Now, if we do that well, you're going to have guys who are going to say, what an awesome experience it was going to this institution. And what was really nice about this project is the customer, it was a state-run project. They wanted to be able to say, okay, fine, if we've got someone that wants to shoot a film in our country, how many associate directors are we going to have in 5 years' time? How many directors are we going to have in 7 years' time? So it was all part of a whole ecosystem. And I could see where my counterpart was coming from. He wants to show the middle part. And I said, well, let's just get the first part right.
Maybe to land the plane, Karine, I've got a question for you. So when someone is in this liminal space, personally or professionally, what happens in the body? What does prolonged uncertainty do to the nervous system?
What a fun question.
Yes. I think that's where a lot of people are.
Yeah.
I think they're burnt out, tired, gutful.
I think, to your point earlier, we spoke about why people want the predictability. I think there's a good case for saying lots of things is dear mekaar in our lives, and we want to have some certainty, and we might all be slightly traumatized or whatever. But I think there's also a different aspect to that, and that's the part where that's just how our brains work. It doesn't really only depend on the environment. Our brains and our nervous system scans the environment the whole time, trying to find a way to keep us safe, right? Which is a really good thing. It keeps us alive, right?
In the forest.
Yes, in the forest, especially if we're going to venture into a forest. So what I think we need to consider maybe is the idea of giving the brain and the body what it needs without letting the forest define that. Okay. So, for example, we know that some sense of predictability, some embodiment, those things can give us that feedback, I almost want to say. So if I prioritize exercising, being in my body, practicing mindfulness, doing regular breathing, making sure that there's some predictability in my daily routine and my schedule, I give my brain a lot of the feedback that I need to tolerate the difficult things that's going to happen if I enter the forest, right? I actually see this picture the whole time of like, you're going out of the zoo into this forest, not with a GPS, because that would be too predictable, right? But also not completely blindsided. So you have this guide that's going to be on the lookout, show you the things in your sideline. But part of going there is go with food, go with your shoes on, go with prep the night before, sleep well, so that you are able to tolerate the difficulties that the forest will give you. And I think we neglect that. I think we have to control the forest to have predictability. Because our brains do need predictability. Otherwise, we are in fight and flight the whole time. But if you can do some prep on the other side, take good care of your relationships, take good care of your mental health, sleep well, then it's easier to navigate the forest with your guide.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Companion.
Like that. Guys, anything that we didn't discuss that you think, I wish we mentioned that or asked that question, anything else?
Just top of mind, it's, as we've been chatting, this companion, I think the importance of finding good curators out there. I was listening to another podcast, and there was a guy that sort of really got into this idea of content. I think for, again, my generation, I don't want to put anyone in the same bucket as I have before, but we've gone from kind of listening to the radio and just being there with play, record, pause, and making a mixtape was like a big thing for us. And then we sacrificed the mixtape because we now had iTunes or Spotify or whatever. And then the algorithm kicked in. And the algorithm is a bit of an analogy to where we are, because it does become an echo chamber. It does seem to repeat. It just looks at attributes and saying it's similar to, similar to, similar to. So there's an AI element to it. But now sometimes it's just nice to listen to a DJ. Sometimes it's nice to sort of let yourself relax and let someone navigate you through a space. So I still tune into radio stations abroad, or sometimes listen to the radio here, where someone's got my vibe, but he will come up with an outlier once in a while. A tune that I wasn't thinking, some obscure track that was found in a vault in Ghana a couple of years ago, and someone spun it out. I think it's very important for our commercial and mental health to take a step out of predictability and let someone be your guide for a little while and curate a certain space or interest or set of interests for you. I think it's a very welcome antidote in terms of the speed at which we have to operate these days.
Love that. Guys, thank you very much. I think we need to wrap this up. We can go in circles with a lot of these topics, but thank you for joining. Karin again, Stephen.
Sure.
All the best with your unpredictable weather in Cape Town and your soon to possibly be. Thank you, Sonia.